Your brother's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Community college can wait, my dad said while slamming his glass on the restaurant table. My brother laughed while showing off the custom gold watch Dad bought him for the ceremony. I asked one simple question. So there's really nothing left for my tuition? Dad leaned across the table and said, "You should be grateful we even let you stay here." Every head in the restaurant turned toward me when the waitress quietly asked if I was okay. But that moment wasn't where the story started. It was just the moment I finally understood what I had always been to this family. My name is Ethan. I'm 24 years old. Most nights, I finish a 10-hour warehouse shift somewhere around 3 a.m., drive home smelling like cardboard and machine oil, open my laptop, and study until sunrise. That's been my routine for 3 years. Not because I enjoy running on 4 hours of sleep. Because engineering school doesn't pay for itself, and I made a decision a long time ago that I wasn't going to quit. In my family, there were two kinds of sons. There was Caleb, my older brother, who got applause for breathing. And then there was me, the one who quietly kept things running while everyone else took the credit. I'm not saying I was perfect. I'm saying I showed up. I missed parties to cover utility bills when Dad's construction business had a slow quarter. I repaired the family car twice using tutorials I found online because a mechanic would have cost us money we didn't have. I skipped a semester once, not because I failed anything, but because the rent was short and nobody else in the house was going to fill that gap. I did it without being asked. I did it without a thank you. My dream was never complicated. I didn't want a big house or a designer watch or a wedding that cost more than most people earn in a year. I wanted to finish my degree, get stable work as an engineer, and stop depending on anyone. That was it. That was the whole plan. But in our family, even that simple request felt like I was asking for something unreasonable. Every time I brought up tuition, there was a sigh, a look, a comparison. Dad would remind me that money was tight, while somehow finding cash for Caleb's new car or Caleb's weekend trips with friends. Mom would say I needed to be patient, that everything worked out for people who were grateful. I started to feel like the word grateful was a weapon they only used on me. The part that stung the most wasn't even the money. It was the mockery. My parents called my laptop work a computer hobby. Dad once told a neighbor, loudly enough for me to hear, that Ethan was the kind of kid who would rather stare at screens than do real work. Caleb called me a nerd at every family dinner like it was a punchline that never got old. What none of them understood was that I wasn't just staring at screens. But I'll get to that. I want to pause here for a second. If you grew up in a home where support felt like it had a favorites list, where you worked twice as hard and got half the recognition, where asking for basic help felt like pulling teeth while someone else got everything handed to them quietly, then you already know exactly how this felt. You know the particular exhaustion of being the dependable one who nobody depends on in return. If you're building something right now while your family thinks it's a joke, keep going. This channel exists for people like you and me. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we tell stories here about people who were underestimated and still came out ahead. Hit that hype button and drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Now let me tell you about the wedding. Dad announced it like a press release. Caleb was getting married, and this family was going to do it right. $38,000 right. Designer venue with a marble foyer and a chandelier the size of a small car. Imported flowers from 3 different suppliers. A honeymoon package that included flights, a resort, and a private tour itinerary. Dad said it with his chest out, proud, like this was his greatest achievement. I waited until we were alone to ask. I kept my voice low. I kept it respectful. I said, "Dad, I still have a tuition balance I need to clear before next semester. Could even a small portion help with that?" Mom walked in from the kitchen like she had been listening the whole time. "Of course," she said. "Of course you're going to make this about yourself." I wasn't making it about myself. I was asking a question. But that's the thing about being the second choice child. Every need you express becomes a character flaw. Caleb came home that evening and somehow already knew I had asked. He sat across from me at dinner and said, with a smile, "Maybe if you stopped wasting time on your laptop, you'd be able to afford school yourself." Everyone at the table laughed. I didn't. Dad doubled down. Education wasn't an emergency, he said. The wedding had to look successful. Appearances mattered. I sat there and thought about the semester I deferred so they could cover rent. I thought about the car I fixed for free. I thought about how many times I had been the emergency fund no one acknowledged. Then Mia, my younger cousin who was visiting that week, looked at me from across the table. She wasn't laughing. She was the only one who wasn't. A few days later, I found out something that shifted everything. Dad had quietly withdrawn money from a small college fund Grandma had set up years ago for both Caleb and me. She had written it clearly before she passed. Equal support. Both boys. That was her wish. The money was gone. Used for wedding deposits. At the next family dinner, Dad called me ungrateful in front of everyone. He said I only ever thought about money. I tried to explain. I told them I just needed enough to stay enrolled one more semester. Relatives looked at me with pity and then looked at Caleb, the charming one, the one who smiled easily and told funny stories, and sided with the version of events that required less uncomfortable truth. Caleb leaned back in his chair and said, loudly enough for the whole table, maybe Ethan can live stream the wedding from the parking lot since he can't afford a suit. The table erupted. Even the relatives I had helped in the past laughed along. Mia did not laugh. I left early, and as I walked out, I heard Dad say, clearly, not quietly enough, he'll never amount to much anyway. He thought I was already gone. I was still in the hallway. After that dinner, things moved from bad to worse in ways I hadn't expected. I discovered I had been quietly removed from every family group chat. I didn't notice at first because the silence felt normal. But Mia mentioned something about a tasting event for the wedding, and I realized I had never been invited. Mom had told relatives I was too bitter to participate in family things. She was managing the story before I could tell it myself. I kept working my shifts. I watched the social media posts go up. Caleb and his future wife at wine tastings. Dad posting photos of the flower arrangements with captions about family and joy. I scrolled past them at 2 in the morning from a break room that smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. Then Caleb called me. Not to apologize. He needed the wedding website fixed. There was a technical issue and the RSVP form was broken. He said, "You're good with nerd stuff. Can you just take a look?" I stayed up that night and rebuilt the whole backend. Cleaned the code. Fixed the form. Improved the page loading speed while I was at it. 2 days later, Caleb posted publicly that he had hired professionals to handle the website, and the results were amazing. Not one mention of me. I read that post 3 times. Then I closed my phone and went back to work. Dad came to me a week before the wedding and said he needed a loan. An unexpected vendor had added fees and the budget was stretched. He said family helps family. He said it with the same confidence he had when he drained Grandma's fund and called my education a non-emergency. I said no. He called me selfish. He said I had always been selfish. I thought about every utility bill I had covered without being asked and said nothing. My warehouse manager pulled me aside around that time and said, "Ethan, I've been watching you. You're burning out. Whatever's happening at home, you need to handle it because you're going to break." He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't ready to break just yet. I was getting ready for something different. At the pre-wedding dinner, in front of Caleb's future in-laws, Caleb made another joke. He said I still lived at home because failure was expensive. Dad laughed. I watched the people at that table form their opinions of me in real time, based entirely on a performance Caleb had been rehearsing for years. I left quietly. I always left quietly. That night, I got an email from my university. Unpaid tuition balance. Enrollment at risk of cancellation. I sat in my car in the warehouse parking lot and read it twice. For the first time, I genuinely considered quitting school. Then my phone buzzed. It was Mia. "I found something," she said. I was helping Aunt Linda sort through some old paperwork, and I found emails. Dad told someone the college fund was meant to go toward Caleb's future, not split equally. But I found Grandma's original note too. She wrote both your names. I took photos of everything. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after that call. Here is what my family never understood about my so-called computer hobby. For the past 4 years, under an anonymous name, I had been running a freelance cybersecurity and software consulting business. Small companies, local service firms, a few medical offices. I found vulnerabilities in their systems, patched them, built them better infrastructure, and charged accordingly. My clients knew me by my handle. Nobody in my family had ever asked enough questions to find out what I actually did. I stayed anonymous because I didn't want their approval. I wanted my independence. There's a difference. By the time the wedding was 3 days away, my business was generating more consistent income than my warehouse job. I had quietly paid down most of my tuition balance on my own. Not because someone helped me, because I had been building quietly while they were busy laughing. I had also saved everything. Every bank record showing the transfers from Grandma's education account. Screenshots of a message where Dad told his brother the fund was being redirected. Grandma's handwritten note that Mia photographed. A paper trail that told the entire story without any ambiguity. A legal consultant I had met through one of my cybersecurity clients had already looked at the documents. He told me what they meant and what my options were. I had a plan, and nobody in that family saw it coming, because they had never paid close enough attention to see me at all. The wedding venue was beautiful. I'll give Dad credit for that. The chandeliers caught the light in a way that made everything look golden, and the imported flowers filled the room with a scent that was almost overwhelming, sweet and heavy and expensive. I sat at a table near the back and watched my family perform for their guests, and I waited. During the reception, Dad took the microphone. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about pride. He said Caleb was the son who made this family proud, and the room applauded warmly. Then he said, almost as an aside, almost casual, some people in life dream. Others actually succeed. He looked at me when he said it. Caleb raised his champagne glass in my direction with a smirk. Mia was sitting 2 seats away from me. She leaned over and said quietly, "Do it now." I stood up. The room didn't go quiet right away. People were still clinking glasses and adjusting napkins. But something about the way I stood made Dad stop. "Not here. Here is exactly where it needs to be," I said, because here is where he called me ungrateful. Here is where Caleb told a room full of people I couldn't afford a suit. So yes, here. Caleb stood up. His voice broke between anger and panic. "You're ruining my wedding. You came here to ruin this." I looked at him. I kept my voice calm. I said, "No. You ruined this family the moment you decided humiliation was entertainment." Dad was shouting now. At me, at Mom, at relatives nearby. He was blaming the venue, the timing, the alcohol, everyone except himself. Then something shifted in the room. One of the guests, a man near the front, stood up and looked at the screen carefully. He recognized my anonymous brand name from the cybersecurity work I had done for his company. He looked at me and said, slowly, "That's you? You're the one who fixed our entire system last year." 2 other guests nearby turned to look. I said yes. The whispers changed after that, because I wasn't just the ungrateful son with a laptop hobby anymore. I was someone their colleagues had paid good money to trust. Caleb's new in-laws were sitting very still. They had come to this wedding believing they were joining a successful, unified family. Now they were watching bank records scroll across a projector screen, showing that the groom's father had redirected an education fund meant for his own son. Mia stood up from her seat. She said, loudly enough for the tables near her to hear, "I saw the records too. I found them myself. Everything he's showing is real." Dad looked around the room. The applause he had expected was gone. Some relatives near the door had already stood up. A few were moving toward the exit. His brother, the one he had sent that message to, was not making eye contact with anyone. I set the microphone down on the table. I picked up my bag, and I walked out of that ballroom while the argument continued behind me without me. The night air outside the venue was cool and quiet. Inside, I could hear raised voices and chairs scraping. I got in my car and drove to campus, because I had a study session I had already rescheduled twice. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a small apartment near campus. Small is generous, actually. It was 1 bedroom with a kitchen that fit exactly 1 person at a time, and the water pressure was inconsistent. But it was mine. Nobody else had a key. Nobody knocked on my door to ask for favors or loans or performances. I returned to school full-time. My tuition was cleared. My business kept growing, and I started taking on larger clients, companies that needed more than one-time fixes. My name, the real one, started to carry weight in circles where it mattered. Dad called several times in the month after the wedding. I didn't answer. Relatives who had laughed at dinner jokes started sending cautious messages asking how I was doing. I recognized what was happening. The story had shifted. Ethan was no longer the ungrateful one. He was the one who had been right the whole time, and now everyone was doing the math. Caleb's marriage started under heavy strain. His in-laws had questions. There were conversations about trust and about what kind of family their daughter had married into. I didn't know all the details, and I didn't seek them out. That wasn't my business anymore. Mom sent a long message one afternoon. She said the family was hurting. She said she hoped I would find it in my heart to move forward. She did not say she was sorry. She did not acknowledge what had been taken or what had been said. She used the word heal for times without once using the word wrong. I read it. I did not respond. The only person from that family I stayed in contact with was Mia. We got coffee sometimes. She was applying to universities, and I helped her think through her options. She was sharp and underestimated in her own corner of the family, and she deserved someone in her corner. I tried to be that. Looking back on all of it now, the overnight shifts, the unpaid bills I covered, the repairs, the website I rebuilt for free, the years of being mocked at dinner tables, I don't carry it as weight anymore. It shaped something in me that I didn't know I needed. Being overlooked meant nobody watched closely enough to see what I was building. Being dismissed meant I never had to perform for their approval. Being called ungrateful by the people who took the most from me taught me, faster than anything else could have, that gratitude in that house was only ever a word they used to keep me quiet. I wasn't quiet anymore, but I also wasn't loud. I was just clear. And the people who laughed at my future were the same people who never bothered to understand it. If this story hits something familiar, if you've ever sat at a family table feeling invisible while someone else got praised for doing half of what you did, I want you to know that you are not alone and you are not wrong for wanting basic fairness. You are not selfish for asking. You are not bitter for remembering. Were you ever financially overlooked while a sibling got everything? Did someone dismiss your education like it was less important than their comfort? Did you ever feel guilty for wanting an equal chance? Leave your story in the comments. This community is built for people who were underestimated at home and still showed up anyway. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every single story on this channel is here because someone like you or me kept going when it would have been easier to stop. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs it today. And to everyone who stayed through Ethan's story until the end. Your experiences are real. Your worth is not decided by the people who failed to see it, and the things they called useless about you might be the very things that carry you forward. Thank you for being here. Keep building.